Namavinu kali kale nahi hara dharma. Sarva mantra saranam e shastra marma. Nama, the holy name. Vinu, without. Kali kale, in this age of Kali. Nahi, there is none. Hara, or any alternative. Dharma, religious principles. Sarva, all. Mantra, hymns. Sara, essence. Nam, the holy name. Hey, this is. Shastra, revealed scriptures. Marma, purport. Translation: in this age of Kali, there is no other religious principles than the chanting of the holy name, which is the essence of all Vedic hymns. This is the purport of all scriptures. Please repeat this. In this age of Kali, there is no other religious principles than the chanting of the holy name, which is the essence of all Vedic hymns. This is the purport of all scriptures. Purport: the principles of the Parampara systems were strictly honored in the ages of Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga and Dwapara Yuga. But in the present age, Kali Yuga, people neglect the importance of this system of Shrauta Parampara, or receiving knowledge by disciplic succession. In this age, people are prepared to argue that they can understand that which is beyond their limited knowledge and perception through so-called scientific observations and experiments, not knowing that actual truth comes down to men from authorities. That actual truth comes down to men from authorities. This argumentative attitude is against the Vedic principles, and it is very difficult for one who adopts it to understand that the holy name of Krishna is as good as Krishna himself. Since Krishna and his holy name are identical, the holy name is eternally pure and beyond material contamination. It is the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a transcendental vibration. It is the Supreme Personality of Godhead as a transcendental vibration. The holy name is completely different from material sound, as confirmed by Narottam Das Thakur, Golokela Premadhan, Harinam Sankirtan. The transcendental vibration of Harinam Sankirtan is imported from the spiritual world. Thus, although materialists who are addicted to experimental knowledge and the so-called scientific method, in brackets, cannot place their faith in the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, it is a fact that simply by chanting the Hare Krishna mantra offenselessly, one can be freed from all the subtle and gross material conditions. The spiritual world is called Vaikuntha, which means without anxiety. In the material world, everything is full of anxiety, Kunta. Whereas in the spiritual world, Vaikuntha, everything is free from anxiety. Therefore, those who are afflicted by a combination of anxieties cannot understand the Hare Krishna mantra, which is free from all anxiety. In the present age, the vibration of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra is the only process which is in a transcendental position beyond material contamination. Since the holy name can deliver the conditioned soul, it is explained here to be Sarva Mantra Sara, the essence of all Vedic hymns. A name which represents an object of this material world may be subjected to arguments and experimental knowledge. But in the absolute world, a name and its owner, fame and the famous, are identical, and similarly the qualities, pastimes and everything else pertaining to the absolute are all absolute, also absolute. Although Mayavadis profess monism, they differentiate between the Holy Name and the Supreme Lord and the Lord Himself. For him of the Supreme Lord and the Lord Himself. For this offense of Namaparad, they gradually glide down from their exalted position of Brahmagyan, as confirmed in Srimad Bhagavatam 10.2.32, Aruya Krichena Parampadam Satata, Patyantyado Nadrita Yusmat Angraya. Although by severe austerities they rise to the exalted position of Brahmagyan, they nevertheless fall down due to imperfect knowledge of the absolute truth. Although they profess to understand the Vedic mantras, Sarvam Qualidam Brahma, everything is Brahman, they are unable to understand that the holy name is also Brahman. If they regularly chant the Maha Mantra, however, they can be relieved from this misconception. Unless one properly takes shelter of the holy name, he cannot be relieved from the offensive stage of chanting the holy name. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. In this age of Kali, there is no other religious principle than the chanting of the holy name, which is the essence of all Vedic hymns. This is the purport of all scriptures. So, the religious principle, what is a religious principle? A religious principle is Dharma. What is Dharma? Dharma is the natural constitution of anything. What is the Dharma of sugar? Is what? Sweet, yes. And what is the Dharma of water? Huh? Liquid, it's water, yeah, it's wet, liquid, yeah. And what's the Dharma of fire? It's hot. So if you take out those elements, then it's not the element anymore. The heat without, fire without heat is not really fire. It's like a brahmachari who's fired up. But for the living entity, has a Dharma also. And his Dharma is to be of service. Serve. Libo? Long time no see. So therefore, the living entity's Dharma is service. So in this age of Kali, there's no other religious principles than the chanting of holy names. For to be effective in the age of Kali and to get knowledge, one has to apply the religious principles. And that is done through chanting the holy name. But then Krishna says something interesting in the Bhagavad Gita in the 13th chapter. Can you give me a Bhagavad Gita, please? I'll make a donation if you want. Jai Ho. Book distribution key. I'll distribute to myself. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna explains actually Arjuna asked some very nice questions in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. He has 6 questions. He says, what is Purusha? What is Prakriti? What is the Kshetra? What is the Kshetragya? What is knowledge? And what is to be known? So, what is Purusha and is Prakriti? So, first thing he says who's actually meant to be the enjoyer, and he says who's meant to be enjoyed, because the definition of Prakriti is female. It's what is meant to be enjoyed. And then he says who's Purusha, so who's actually the enjoyer. So then the next thing he says, what is Kshetra? Kshetra is the field. So what is the field? What is the field of activities? There's the body. So the body manifests because we have a particular desire to interact with the elements previously stated by Krishna in the previous verse. So Krishna says there's 24 elements. And he says those elements, this is what you deal with. So this is what, when you take on a particular body, then the nature, the way the body is, it's like that because you want to interact with the 24 elements that Krishna mentioned in the previous verse. He says because you want to interact with those elements like that, so you get this field of activity. It's like when a farmer, he goes out there and he starts planting some seeds in the field. Then, you know, if you plant soya beans, you're not going to get corn. You're going to get soya beans. So the particular field is cultivated in such a way for a particular production, particular harvest. So therefore, we obtain a body which deals with the 24 elements. That's why Krishna, in the previous verse, he says, as soon as he answers Arjuna's question, he starts listing he says the 5 great elements: false ego, intelligence, the unmanifested, the 10 senses, the mind, the 5 sense objects: desire, hatred, happiness, distress, the aggregate, the life symptoms, and convictions. All these are considered, in summary, to be field of activities and interactions. So Prabhupada says here that in this purport, he says that the scientists, they're addicted to get knowledge. How does he say that? In this age, people are prepared to argue that they can understand that which is beyond their limited knowledge and perception through so-called scientific observation experiment, not knowing that actual truth comes down to men from authorities. So that knowledge, they never get that. The people think that just by... So when Krishna mentions the 24 elements, he kind of refers to, it's like a kid being in the backyard of his house, and he's got the backyard. You know, when you got a kid in the backyard and you have your sand pit and your little car and your little toys, and you've got knowledge of that, and you can move them around. You can go in the sand pit to play a bit in the little car, whatever. But you never get the little kid will never get knowledge of what's beyond the fence. So what Prabhupada is referring to here is the scientists, they're playing in the backyard with the 24 elements. But as we know, the 24 elements are ruled by... They're ruled by the 3 modes of nature. So everything is already set in motion. So whatever you do has already got a resultant action. It's already there. But that's not really... to know about this is not really knowledge. That's just... It's like Prabhupada said, you know, the scientists, they give him a Nobel Prize because he said he found out why the dog is barking. But he said the dog has been barking for millions of years. But you know, who cares that Krishna has made the dog bark for a particular reason, but they never give Krishna the Nobel Prize. They'll give the guy that says that. So this type of scientist is the one that does the backyard thing. So Krishna, in the next text of the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, he will explain not knowledge of the backyard, which everyone can get. And even if you do get knowledge about that, what are you going to do about it? You cannot do anything because karmically, you're bound to the reaction over your actions. So therefore, the scientists, even though they discover so many things that Prabhupada is saying here, this thing, he says here, the principle of the parampara system was strictly honored in the previous ages, but at the present age, people neglect the importance of this system of receiving knowledge by disciplic succession. So then they prepare to argue. So if you get knowledge about what goes on in your backyard, it's not really knowledge because it just happens anyway. Regardless what you do, it's going to happen that way because that is the way the law of karma works. But what Krishna describes, he says, what real knowledge is how to get out of the backyard. So he says that the Purusha, the living entity, is enveloped by Prakriti. So the Purusha, the Atma, is covered by the 24 elements. Now he says that real knowledge is not how to deal with those 24 elements, like health and social things and this and that. He says real knowledge is how to get out of this cage of the 24 elements. So Prabhupada hints here by saying how you get that, you get from authorities to men. So Krishna explains in the next verse what is the process of knowledge. So he says this is how you get knowledge. And very interestingly, basically none of it refers to science. So Krishna says humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadfastness, self-control, renunciation of the object of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth, death, old age, and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home, and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search of the absolute truth. All these are declared to be knowledge. So, what are these? What is this? What are those things we just read?
Quality.
Huh?
Quality.
No, they're not qualities. Sorry?
Regulations of
Knowledge.
They're neither quality nor knowledge. This is actually, Prabhupada explains it in the first line of the purport. He says, this process of knowledge is sometimes misunderstood by less intelligent men as being the interaction of the field of activities. You understand that? It means that this is the way you acquire knowledge. That's what Krishna is saying. Krishna is saying to Arjuna, you want to get knowledge, you want to get, this is the 24 elements, but the 24 elements, they already go according to the three modes of nature. You're not going to get knowledge about that. You get the real knowledge is to get out of the 24 elements. And then here, Krishna says, this is the process which you get out of this. So the first thing is humility. And what does Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita also? Tadvidi patiparena paripashna sebayo patekshantite gyana galina statadashinaha. He says you approach the absolute truth with humility. So that's a process. Then the next one is pridelessness. It's another process. Non-violence is a process. Non-violence, like we say, oh yeah, you don't kill the animals. Sometimes we push the fact, don't kill the animals. But it's not just about killing animals, because non-violence is about everyone has a right, every living entity has a right. And one has to respect that right. That's non-violence. So of course the obvious ones that Prabhupada mentions many times is the slaughterhouses, because they really deny the rights of some living entities. But any person that has rights and we interfere with those rights, that is violence. So for example, the main right of a human being is actually to understand himself and the Supreme Lord, and interfering with that right is violence. So then Krishna goes on with these processes of knowledge. He says approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, etc. But the interesting thing is that in here, as Prabhupada mentions in this purport here, he says, at the end of the purport, he says that the people get mixed up about the Mayavadis profess monism, and they differentiate between the Holy Name and the Supreme Lord and the Lord Himself. So why is it that someone comes to be an impersonal? What are Krishna mentions 3 reasons in the Bhagavad Gita where someone becomes an impersonal. You know those 3 reasons? Why would someone become impersonal versus someone who's not?
They believe they are God themselves.
Yeah, but what leads them to do that? Krishna says it in. Krishna explains that there's the first one is because it's a frustration of trying to enjoy the material world. But become frustrated when things, okay, I'm not going to duplicate what's going on here somewhere else. And the second reason is because one has a fear of spiritual identity. Because identity creates trouble, here, so therefore I'm not going to do that. And the third one is spiritual laziness. Like it's too difficult, it's too hard basket, I'm not going to take it up. So Krishna says for those three reasons people become impersonal. But interestingly, in this verse here of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also says that, and it also concurs with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when he says that if you really want to know, if you really want to chant the holy name, what are the qualifications? Yes. So he says, basically those qualities that Krishna mentions here in this 13th chapter, 12th verse, 8 to 12, all those qualities are summed up by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, chanting the holy name with humility, tolerance, and all respects to others. So we can see that if we adopt this process, for example, you take one of them and you say detachment from children, wife, home, and the rest. Obviously, when one is focused on those things, his spiritual life generally doesn't go too well. Of course, it doesn't mean we cannot have feelings for the wife, the children, and so on. But it means that the focus, the intent is not particularly on them. This is something that comes of its own accord. So, when we adopt this process of knowledge, then we understand what is beyond the 24 elements. Otherwise, you can get confused, and the confusion is by focusing on trying to understand how the 24 elements work, where in fact they're already working on their own. Just like the dog is barking on its own, it doesn't need a scientist to explain how the dog is barking. But the real purpose of the human being is to acquire knowledge, as Krishna says here, and through that knowledge you are able to extract oneself from the engagement of the 24 elements. And this knowledge, as Prabhupada says here, can only come from authorities. Because as a child in the backyard, they can't really, without his parents taking him out and showing him what's going on. Similarly, a person who is engaged in those 24 elements, he cannot by himself, with any amount of knowledge or any amount of science, understand what is going on beyond those 24 elements. And therefore, Prabhupada refers that to as an addiction. He says if one refuses and one argues with the authority, then it becomes like an addiction. And that addiction actually doesn't lead anywhere. One just remains engaged within the 24 elements. And even though Prabhupada hints here that even though one may be chanting Hare Krishna, but if one doesn't understand, it doesn't get knowledge, it'll be very difficult to keep the practice. And as we see also, it happens. Oftentimes people take up the chanting of Hare Krishna, but then it's like because not understanding how the process is acquired, then we give it up at some point. And giving it up means that there's a lack of understanding of the authorities tell us, you just do this, this and that. Like in the, I think it was Maharaji quoted on the night Bhagavad Gita class. I think it was the Chandogya Upanishad. It says clearly, it says that you, by repeatedly performing the spiritual activities, then you end up with knowledge of the Absolute. But oftentimes, because we mix emotions and sentiment and so many other things, then we give up the practice that is given from authorities to men because it doesn't feel right. And this is the issue with the difference between sentiment and knowledge. Because knowledge, as Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita, it's very clear. You behave like that, you get humility, pridelessness, non-violence. You behave like that, you will acquire knowledge. But if you just try with your head to get knowledge, or because it says emotions in the previous verse, it says, what's the word that he uses? In the 24 elements, then eventually, even though we've got the best practice, like the practice of the religious principle of Kali Yuga, still it will be very difficult to pursue or to perfect it even if we don't understand how to acquire knowledge. Therefore, this purport is mostly about hearing from authority, and even though sometimes it doesn't feel right or it doesn't sit right in a sense that I just don't understand what's going on, by doing it in a way that is according to knowledge, then we will gradually understand. And oftentimes the problem we have is that we didn't develop the ability to apply, because we're still contaminated with the way to acquire knowledge. And because of that, as Prabhupada says, addiction here, then we don't actually receive proper knowledge, but we get it mixed up with emotion and sentiment. And then we think, oh, well, this is just not good enough, so I'll just give it up. So Prabhupada at the end of the purport writes that even though by severe austerities they rise to the exalted position of Brahma Gyan, they nevertheless fall down due to imperfect knowledge of the Absolute Truth. So even by performing severe austerities, I mean, we're talking about serious things here, still they will fall down because they're unable to understand that the holy name is also Brahman. And if they regularly chant the Maha Mantra, however, they can be relieved from this misconception. But the problem is they're regularly chanting. So to regularly chant the holy name, we have to acquire knowledge as well to understand what we're doing. Okay. It's on.
One of the qualities Krishna lists of knowledge is freedom from entanglement with wife and children. So we see, most of us, majority of us are grihastas with wife and children. So can you maybe explain? It seems like difficult, even though you know quite serious about the Christian consciousness, it seems very difficult to be free from entanglement totally. The wife and children. There's so many dealings you have to do that are maybe not so Christian conscious.
Sure. Just one point of clarification is that these are not qualities, again, they're process of knowledge. So becoming free from entanglement from children, wife, home, and the rest, as Krishna says, is simply when you apply the process of knowledge. There's one particular point that Krishna makes in that verse. He says to accept a bona fide spiritual master. Prabhupada says it in this purport as well. It's very important in spiritual life. So what happens when you accept a spiritual master, you get directions. Those directions themselves will stop you from getting entangled. Now, getting entangled doesn't mean you don't have feelings for your children, for your wife. You have feelings. But it doesn't get you entangled. So, by following the process of knowledge, receiving initiation from a bona fide spiritual master includes certain instructions. If we are to follow the instructions, because we understand that the process is descending rather than ascending, we don't get entangled. Regardless how many children you have, how Griha Medi you may look or not, but if you follow those instructions, you're safe. And that's why it's called process of knowledge, because it gives you also, generally when you have knowledge, knowledge is compared to light, and when you have a light, you can walk in the dark. And the Grihastha ashram is also compared to darkness or the dungeon. But if you follow the process of knowledge, then you're safe anywhere you may go. So that's why it's important to follow all these instructions of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita properly, and then you can venture in life. But Prabhupada makes another point also. He makes Dharma. He says Dharma. He says, yeah, real Dharma, it means that actually you get married and you're not like monkey, in the monkey life. So Dharma means follow certain rules, and if those rules, as Krishna says, Dharma viruddha bhutesu, he says if you even marriage life is accepted, sex life is accepted by Krishna if it's done properly. So that's the safeguard. Again, it comes from authorities. So when it comes from spiritual authorities, then there is a safeguard and you don't get entangled. So you're safe.
Reflecting on the point you made, you repeated a couple times the term addicted to experimental knowledge. Prabhupada said materialists are addicted to experimental knowledge in the so-called scientific method and cannot place their faith in the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. You said that you've seen people go away from Krishna consciousness after some time because they're not able to change from this, like trying to understand with their mental faculties, trying to put the pieces together yourself in all different departments of life, and just simply have faith and continue the process of chanting. I just was reflecting on that, how it's really important to develop that simple faith. And I think it's also quite interesting how we think, especially in the current times, that we could possibly understand the absolute truth with our mind.
Yeah. Good point.